What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. Pokemon games always need to bring in all sorts of fun new creatures to collect and use in battle, with all sorts of inspirations, levels of evolution, and of course, different types. Each generation has their own unique type combinations that they introduce to let us learn how different elements can interact and all of their different strengths. And sometimes we can even see multiples of that new type pairing at the same time. However, this doesn't always turn out for the best, and they can mess it up even after they've already covered it before. So let's look through all the generations and see which repetitive ideas worked and which didn't, with the top 6 best and worst repeated types from the same game. Number 6 worst, Bug and Flying. On paper, this is clearly one of the worst type combinations in general, with its pitiful defensive spread having more weaknesses than strengths, but that doesn't mean all of them are bad. I mean, even if Butterfree is pretty weak past the early game, they still had Scyther to bring in the cool factor through the roof. Hoenn managed to balance this pretty well too, but right in the middle there we had a rough time for Bug and Flying and Johto. This is not at all to disparage the cuteness of Ladybug or Yanma. If those are your favorite Pokemon, then I'm happy for you, but it can't possibly be for their usefulness. Ledion's stats fall short of even unevolved early-game Pokemon. With its laughably low attack stats, I mean, letting it eventually have the Iron Fist ability is almost an insult. Plus, even if you wanted a Ladybug back in Gen 2, it was a version exclusive timed only for the morning, so it was incredibly rare for most players, which I guess might actually be a hidden blessing. As for Yanma, it's got the same base stat total as Ledion, but at least its attack and speed are better off, even if it's got paper-thin defenses. Simply put, Yanma just doesn't give off the energy of a Pokemon that seems complete, and they clearly agreed because years later Yanmega came in to actually be intimidating and be good in battle on top of that. So Bug and Flying were already on the brink, and then they decided to give us an unfinished Dragonfly and a weakling Ladybug to win us over? They weren't doing this type combination any favors. Number 6 best, Bug and Water. However, Bug is not a total waste. Of course, Water and Bug was first introduced with Surskit, but after years of being alone, the Alola region decided to double dip, resulting in the Dewpider and Wimpod lines. Already, this is a massive improvement with beefed up stats, not to mention designs, and signature abilities for each one of them to show off their unique skills, like fleeing for their life or being unable to breathe air. These sound like huge drawbacks, but somehow these aquatic insects make it not only work, but seem like positives, when you also have great powerful bug attacks to pair along with them. Personally, I do prefer Araquanid over Golisopod, but they're both powerful offerings that are enticing in different ways, so that they can stand apart as more than just happening to share the same types, which, by the way, pairs much better together than Flying, since Water only has 2 weaknesses and Bug takes care of one of them. So even if you feel like you might be missing out by only picking one, it's not like they're version exclusives, so you could load up on both of them, or even all 3 if you want. You can find them all in the Alola region. Number 5 worst, Psychic and Flying. The Psychic type was first paired with Flying in Gen 2, with the mascot of Silver version famously confusing everyone with that combination. However, it was also joined by Pokemon that some people mistake for Hoenn entries instead, because Natu and Xatu were just so forgettable. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm actually calling out the Unova region for its bizarre selections for Psychic and Flying, and how out of place they are. First of all, there are a ton of Psychic types in Unova. Some of them you would have already caught by the time you reach Woobat, so would you even bother using the Cave Fodder instead of the one you already have? Maybe, but then you go on to find a Sigilyph who has the exact same typing. When most of the Psychics are monotyped, it's incredibly disappointing to have any dual type repeating. But at least Victini and Darmanitan had the decency to be strong. Swoobat has one of the lowest base stat totals of any fully evolved Pokemon in Unova, making it pretty weak and therefore not likely to evolve because it keeps getting KO'd to lower its needed friendship stats, and Sigilyph seems to specialize in supportive tricks rather than outright attacks. That can work for some players, but it makes this enigmatic sphere of mystery quite unintuitive for most players, leaving them to wonder why they made 2 unsatisfying Psychic and Flying types at once with an unbalanced spread that's not in anyone's favor. But don't worry, because we're going to talk about Flying in a more positive light later. Number 5 best, Bug and Steel. Another pairing that started in Johto, these bugs got in on the ground level of the new Steel typing, and it paid off tremendously. Obviously, Scizor gets all of the press here because he's a sleek new evolution of an existing Pokemon that was already a fan favorite, but Forretress is no slouch either, as one of the best defensive options that you could ask for. Even with their 4 times weakness to fire as an obvious flaw, the trade-off is no other weaknesses with 9 resistances in return, so those Pokemon can shrug off most any hit that's not coated in flames. Now sadly, Scizor does require a Metal Coat trade to evolve, so it can be hard to get, but you do get a fancy Mega Evolution if you go through the trouble. However, Forretress is still a good Pokemon in its own right. Even with its abysmal speed, it has a sneakily high attack stat, which only goes unnoticed next to its whopping 140 defense. But I have had it do decent damage with even unboosted HM attacks. So Johto sort of made up for their bug types earlier and led this combo to be even better than when we see it later on, at least in my opinion. Number 4 worst, Water and Ground. Now listen, obviously this type combination is one of, if not the best in all of Pokemon, so I am not saying that Water and Ground is inherently bad, just the way that it was handled in the Hoenn region. Every other time that we've seen it, there's only been a single line with these types, but so far Hoenn is the only occasion where they doubled up on this amazing type pairing. However, given that one of them was a starter, it doomed the other to be overshadowed for all time. Poor Whiscash is not only plainly weaker than Swampert, but it is so much harder to find out in the wild, over being handed one at the start of the game. And it's not like you could say, well, it's there as a backup in case you don't pick Swampert, because there is no such replacement for a fire and fighting type, or even a single other pure grass type for Sceptile, so I'm not sure why they opted to drop this catfish next to the starter with the highest base stat total ever, not to mention a Mega on steroids to boot. But when even the evil teams that used both of its types decided to skip out on Whiscash, you know that there is no hope and you have a serious problem. Number 4 best, Water and Dark. Hoenn can do it right though. You could technically go with Kalos for this if you count Mega Gyarados with Greninja, but I never really thought it was a great idea for Gyarados to become Dark specifically, so we will be looking at Hoenn instead. The Sharpedo line was the first instance of this pairing, however they also snuck in Crawdaunt to gain the Dark type upon evolution, which provided 2 phenomenal options for anyone that wants to try them, which is good because this typing is stronger than it is weak, especially if you use one before the Fairy type was a thing, making them even more threatening. Now, they are both physical attackers, however Crawdaunt has much more defense due to its hard shell, while Sharpedo is much faster, and it's even got a Mega Evolution of its own to use. And allegedly some people think that they're even related with the stars on their head, but even without all of that, both of these dark types stand out as amazing choices even with so many other water types in the Hoenn region. But if you're not buying what I'm selling here, then there's always Dark and Grass that you could pull from instead. Number 3 worst, Electric and Fighting. Despite what some people insist upon, we never saw these types put together until Gen 9, which is really late, but we finally got Electric with the last type that it needed, and it wasn't at all what we expected. The first time you're going to encounter this would be with Pomo, who is my least favorite Pokemon of all time. Quite an impressive feat after all these years, but this Pokemon shouldn't even exist. Pawmi could have easily just evolved straight into Pawmot if they wanted the fighting combination to remain special, but Pawmo gets it at level 18 anyway, so it's not that special. So then why not just have Pawmi be fighting from the start? Other Pikachu clones get to have dual typings no problem, but since it evolves, it's suddenly not worthy anymore? So having the most unnecessary Pokemon ever be our first example of this long-desired typing is a huge embarrassment. And even though Iron Hands is a pretty cool Paradox form, you can't find it until the end of the game, meaning that you can't use it casually in the region, and it's a version exclusive, so it might as well not be in there, leaving Pomo as the main electric fighting type that you'll see, which is just a huge disgrace. Number 3 best, Grass and Fighting. There are better overall type pairings like Psychic and Steel for instance, but Jirachi was an after-the-fact mythical, while Beldum was a post-game gift, so as great as they are, you can't exactly use them in Hoenn. That's why I would say Grass and Fighting in Hisui is a better prospect, largely because this combination was in dire need of rehabilitation, and Legends Arceus actually succeeded in that. On paper, Grass and Fighting isn't that bad with equal strengths and weaknesses, but I suppose the quad flying flying weakness is usually what tips the scales as to why people think it's bad. Even though there have been some pretty amazing grass and fighting before, flying types are just so common it's hard to avoid. However, gameplay in the Hisui region means that there are no random encounters, and if you see a flying type, you can usually run the other way. But even if you do get caught, both of these new regional forms that gained fighting have new signature moves as well. Triple Arrows, which lowers the foe's defense and raises the critical hit ratio, while Victory Dance raises attack and defense, and it boosts the power of your next attack by 50%. There's a reason Hisui honored both of these Pokemon by making one of them a starter and giving the other a noble boss fight, because Grass and Fighting finally got the respect that it deserves. Number 2 worst, Grass and Ghost. Speaking of Decidueye, Grass and Ghost is not a bad pairing intrinsically. The double immunities put it over the edge for many. However, it hasn't always been handled the best. For some reason, Grass and Ghost seemingly has to be included in pairs every time we see it, but the blame for that likely falls on Kalos, who started the trend. I love Trevenant a lot. It's an amazingly spooky Pokemon that's actually pretty scary, but it somehow gets constantly overlooked for its counterpart, Gourgeist, who is far more on the goofy candy corn side of a Halloween spirit, so I don't really care for it as much. But plenty of other people do, and on a practical level, there are the different sizes of the pumpkin line that have the tangible battle distinctions that change its speed and defense. So I can appreciate that they wanted to try all of this out, but why did they think it should be directly beside another Pokemon of that same typing, with no such gimmick to benefit from? Was it just to make it a trait evolution with something similar enough? Because that's never really been a requirement before. So again, I love Trevenant much more than the Gourds that don't really change enough for my taste, and I do not appreciate how they sent this tree out to die. Well, I guess it's already undead, but they clearly propped up one at the expense of the other. Which is not the way that you make people excited for a new type combination, that's for sure. Number 2 best, Fire and Ghost. However, sometimes Ghost does get it right. We first saw this typing as a standalone on the Chandelure line, which was a favorite of many. However, the next time we saw a Scorching Spectre, there were 2 of them. But I'm not actually going to focus on Alola, since I'm here to sing the praises of the Paldea games. And singing is appropriate because Skeledirge is a joyously musical yet morbid crocodile. One of the best starters that we have seen in generations. Even just from Fuecoco at the start, I could tell this line would be something special, but having a symbiotic relationship with a flaming bird? That's basically 2 Pokemon for the price of 1. You get a free little Paldean Rookidee on its nose. Besides, people are always complaining about starters being bipedal humans, basically, with full-blown jobs. So behold the glory that is Skeledirge, the first starter to stay on all 4s since Primarina. But I'm not even sure the tail counts, so really since Samurott or even Torterra. But if you were wrong and you didn't pick the fire starter, you could still use a fire ghost with Cerulege, who is a haunted suit of armor with burning swords. That is an amazingly simple idea with brilliant execution, and the Pokemon Company seems to know that, as they are promoting Cerulege quite a bit more than you would expect for a new arrival. But it's not hard to see why it would be considered a fan favorite. And my only regret was that it was not advisable to use both of them on the same team. But it's better to have an abundance now than how rare Fire and Ghost used to be back in the day. Number 1 worst, Water and Dragon. This'll probably be the most controversial one, but it was always extraordinary to see a Water Dragon before, what with their beneficial type matchups leaving them with very few resistances, especially before Fairy. And that's not the sole reason that I have my reservations about Paldea's handling of it, but it sure doesn't help. See, to follow up on the ridiculously powerful Dracovish, the next Pokemon deemed worthy of this typing was Tatsugiri, who is not a total weakling, but also its premise makes it incredibly niche from a combat perspective. This Pokemon basically requires another Pokemon to do anything useful, with the Sushi Roll piloting Dondozo like a robot mech. Which is a neat idea, I'll give you that, but it doesn't leave Tatsugiri itself a lot of room to make a mark when it requires another water type to function properly, and this one isn't even part dragon, so isn't that a bit of a downgrade? Now, Walking Wake is pretty fine as the other Gen 9 member of this pairing, but once it came along, Tatsugiri's main focus of special attack was easily topped without even trying, and the Paradox Suicune was also much faster, so there's really no point in wasting the party slots for two Pokemon when one of them could do the job better, leading to maybe the most unbalanced execution of a typing that was shared within the same generation. Number 1 best, Dragon and Flying. See, I told you flying's not all bad. There are plenty of cool dragons in the Hoenn region, but they decided that 3 separate ones should all share the flying type. And even though these Pokemon are vastly different, they all totally fit. One of them is a bird that's made of clouds, so flying is obvious. One of them is a little dragon that always yearned for flight, and then it got to fulfill those dreams. And the final one is the guardian ruler of the skies, who lives in the stratosphere to oppose the whole land and sea theming. So even without wings, it makes perfect sense. We had seen Dragon and Flying before, but here, Salamence is a far departure from the friendly, unthreatening Dragonite. But even Altaria is a different brand of that as well, relying more on its beauty and songs than the goofy demeanor of the pseudo-legend. And then of course, Rayquaza is a different kind of dragon altogether with its longer shape, but its green and red coloring makes it stand out amongst the others. And all of the sharp features create an imposing physique. And, by the way, all 3 of these Pokemon managed to get a Mega Evolution, so they were clearly a big priority and beloved by the fans. Because the one time so far they introduced multiple flying dragons in the same region, we all know that there wasn't a bad choice to be had. So, those are the top 6 best and worst repeated typings used in the same games. Sometimes you can even forget that some Pokemon showed up at the same time, but there are always good and bad repetitions in any dex. So which typing duplications stand out most to you? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded!